her grandmother's eyes, job working for the city, and a hustle on the side. When her son was born, she took a vow to straighten this life out. But the life of a brown woman was a lie she had to live without.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of If It Be Your Will podcast coming to you. What a treat I have here. I say that often, but this is a treat. I've been following Evan Redsky for a while, and it started very punky in his earlier years. And now, as he's growing older and wiser, he's just turned into this amazing singer-songwriter, such a storyteller. And I just want to hop right in. Now, Evan is in Toronto. He is Canadian from Ojibwe Nation, living in Toronto. And he blends this stuff I coined as Canadiana. I mean, it's like Americana, but it's not, because it's Canadian. And it's killer. I just love this kind of music. And it's not country per se, like what you would think of country. It's like old, traditional, like good country. It's not this like country pop stuff that personally I just can't connect with. But Evan's music is the connection that I love with this old country. But there's folk elements, singer-songwriter. I mean, that's just one aspect. Evan, thanks so much for hopping on here with me today. I really like starting these off with a little kind of walk down memory lane. So you grew up in Mississauga the Ojibwe Nation, correct?
Yeah, not to be confused with Mississauga, like just outside of Toronto, but there's a community just outside of Blind River. It's on the north shore of Lake Huron. It's called Mississaugi, and it's a small community. There's probably about, maybe 500 or 600 people that live on reserve there. But yeah, I grew up north, and on the north shores of Lake Huron. It's just a stretch of a highway between Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury, Ontario.
Nice. And what was your upbringing like around music? And where are your earliest memories of the inspiration of music being something that you were really drawn to when you were a youngster?
Honestly, it was just like we had like FM radio back then, and that was something that was always on. I remember just like my grandparents always had the radio on. My mom was always listening to the radio, and funnily enough, my school bus driver as a kid loved music. He was a huge fan of music, so he always had the radio on. And at that time, it was all what you would expect in the 90s and early 2000s, like lots of Blue Rodeo, lots of Tom Petty, just all those sort of FM sort of hits from the day. But yeah, that's kind of where some of my earliest memories of enjoying music and being sort of curious about it started, for sure. Yeah. Just those early days, just driving back up and down the highway.
Yeah. I mean, being in cars are great memories for music, right? Because exactly the radio or cassette tape, way back in the 8 tracks that they had in there. What was it about music that started getting you thinking about seeing yourself as one of those people you were listening to on the radio?
Yeah, I remember it was around the era and that time of I guess it would have been around the pop punk era. I just remember being a kid and watching bands sort of pop up on the punk show on Much Music, and that was really fascinating. I remember I kind of have this sort of pretty vivid memory of my mom folding laundry at home, and we were just watching TV late, and she had the music videos on, and it must have been 9 or 10 p.m. whenever the punk show came on back then. And yeah, it just kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. I remember watching, it was a Rancid music video, and probably in a NoFX video, and it just kept rolling and rolling, and I just was I just kind of had a more or less this sort of spiritual experience watching all this music and hearing all this stuff for the first time. It was awesome, but it really did send me down a rabbit hole. Even as a kid, I believe it was probably in the 6th grade, maybe around the 6th, 7th grade, and that sort of opened up the whole can of worms.
Yeah. And what was it about that more heavy punk that pulled you in? Was it the energy? Was it the I don't care aesthetic? Like, what was it that you identified with?
Yeah, I definitely think it tapped into a bit of the sort of frustration that I had about, maybe even subconsciously at that age about like sort of the environment that I came from, maybe the subtle or maybe overt racism that I experienced as a kid or watched, older people, including my mom, like experience. And I think when I heard punk rock and like, heavy music for the first time, energetically, I think it just sort of tapped into something. And yeah, I was all in, thankfully all that music spoke to me also, like the lyrics, like people standing up for what was right and speaking truth to justice or truth to power. And yeah. And that's, so like at that point, I couldn't save up for a guitar fast enough. And it was around the 7th grade is when I picked up the bass guitar and tried starting bands. And that all started then. The beginning of the end, as they say.
Right. And was the band Single Mothers you were a member of that? And then there was also this Indian Giver punk band, right, that you were a part of? Like what capacity, like how did your involvement in those bands begin? What was the nucleus that kind of got those punk bands rolling?
Well, I grew up in Northern Ontario. I went to high school in Blind River and partially in Sudbury, Ontario. But I went to post-secondary school in London and I was making music. I started writing music and writing my own songs when I was like 13. So by the time I went off to college, that was when I found like a broader music community. And is when I sort of accidentally got the gig in Single Mothers, which at that point was only like 7 or 8 months old as a band. And when I went there for my first year of school, I seen them a couple times and I was like, well, these guys are the best local band. Like, and so I would go to the shows. I was sort of getting familiar with a couple of the dudes in that band at the time. And, it was a hot mess, early on, the whole time almost, but like, so they would borrow gear from me and I had like, extra guitar amps and stuff kicking around. So I had been by that point fully invested into wanting to be a musician. So I had, music gear and I was obsessed with it even at such a young age. But they needed a bass player. I was available. I was playing a show with them with my solo band, which was like, we were trying really hard at that point in time to be like Dinosaur Jr. And they just kind of liked hanging out. And so they invited me into the fold. And I ended up being in that band for like the following like 7 years after that. So that's where that all started. And, those guys in that group, one of the members that was already in there, one of the original members, Mike Peterson, he is now my collaborator and co-writer and band member in Indian Giver. So that project actually didn't start until around the pandemic when I was just kind of sitting at home. And it was always an idea that we had, it was like, it'd be really cool if there was like a native punk band or like a native like hardcore band. And we actually didn't start doing that until like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's been fun. And we were like, we put a record out. We have a couple new singles coming out and heavy music has always have a place in my life, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, how do you separate like your solo stuff is, I don't want to say the opposite. I mean, but it has such different energy, right? Like your solo stuff is much more like I said before, Canadiana and, country twings and folk and pop nuances throughout. Like, was it hard? Were you writing songs as a punk writer and then also writing songs as kind of a singer-songwriter? Or were the songs always just the songs and you figured out how to turn it into a different style?
Well, I guess the through line between those two sort of worlds that I exist in is what I sing about. They're both a lot of the songs that I write, both within Indian Giver and in my solo music, is about the Indigenous lived experience in Canada. There's as much as I know about it, just through my history and my family history. So they're very much parallel in that way, and just sonically they happen to be different, and they sonically just happen to be two types of music I grew up on, I was raised on. So, it was natural for me to pick up a guitar and like, I was obsessed with Neil Young as a young person. And so that was just a natural step for me to start writing like that. And then, having just spent so much time in like rock and roll, the rock, like punk rock scene. I just think it's fun. And it's cathartic in its own way. Like when I write my music and really spend time with myself and have this sort of introspective experience, it's incredibly rewarding and spiritually fulfilling. And the same thing goes for Indian Giver. It just happens to be in this like really loud, brash, energetic, and incredibly cathartic environment. So yeah, no, it's all fun and it's all coming from the same place. You know, it just happens to be just two different things. If I grew up listening to jazz or show tunes, I'm sure that would be, you know, maybe those two genres would be involved, but not so much.
Yeah. And how does a song come to be out? What's your process like of writing songs? And like, do you have to have two different views of, okay, I'm writing for my solo project versus I'm writing for Indian Giver? Like, what's your process when you approach writing a song for each of those two different musical ventures that you're in?
It's tough. You know, I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm aware of my surroundings, not just like physically, of course, but like the political climate, social climate. I think maybe I learned a little bit of this just like growing up on the reserve and around my elders and observing the fact that a lot of times older people just like to sit, watch, and listen, you know, and it's like there's kind of a sort of beauty to that, and that you could take a lot in. And you know, when you're in something like the music scene, there's a lot of people talking and not saying too much. So, including myself, you know. But it's a humble reminder, and sort of I kind of carry it as like a teaching that you need to. I as a storyteller really need to filter, put that through my own filter and my own experiences. And you know, I really do wish I knew where good songs come from, but it's really just work at the end of the day. Like you really have to sit down and write something down, whether it's good or bad, and eventually things start to take shape. Sometimes you get a bolt of lightning experience and it's like things got written in minutes, but that's like 5% of the time. 95% of the time is work.
Right, totally. And do you ever kind of like hit walls in your songwriting process, like where things are just not happening? Like, and how do you overcome those? Like, do you have strategies that you use to kind of unblock it all?
All the time. So yeah, I really struggle. I feel like for me, like even just my musical ability is quite limited. Like I know that much about myself. So like the last few years, I've been really like sort of leaning into writing with others and other friends. And I learn quite a lot with writing with other people. So anytime I feel stuck, I'll make a demo here at home, and then I'll just send a voice note to one of my friends who I trust and respect their opinion. Right. So I get a lot of good feedback from people around me in my circle. And I like to think that I surround myself with some of the best musicians that I could possibly ever know. So it's truly humbling to have like people that I love and respect. So be like, yeah, this is great. Maybe we could move this, or, you know, like that's been a really crucial, important part of my process lately. But, you know, as a writer, you're always struggling. You're always struggling to just sit down and pick up a pen. I think that's like half the battle.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And what's your connection to your lineage? Now, I don't want to misstate it, but your grandfather, James, or was it your father that was
my great-grandfather's name was, James Redsky.
Right. And he was a famous storyteller, right? Like kept the oral language alive of your nation, right? Like, how did that influence you? Like, and I mean, obviously it did, but do you take some of those lessons that you learned from that storytelling and incorporate it into your music as well?
Yeah, that history and those stories are constantly with me. I don't think they go anywhere. I think it's something like it's material, and it's a source of pride that I constantly have to revisit. Again, 1, for inspiration, 2, to stay humble, and 3, to keep the spirit of those people alive. You know, my great grandfather James was you know, he was there basically when they built as a child, they built the residential school just outside of Kenora, Ontario, the Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School, where he went, his son and my father all went. So there was 3 generations of family members that all went to the same residential school, and they were able to keep their language and their stories alive, and that was done orally. And in the case of my great grandfather, he actually was the last physical holder, an elder from my community, to hold on to these ancient birch bark scrolls, which had a lot of stories and cultural significance to where I come from, the people in my culture. And yeah, unfortunately, they were dispossessed in the 60s, 70s by the Glenbow Museum. So yeah, it's, and through that and knowing that history, I take that now as a responsibility, to keep telling stories as best as I could, because they all did it, right? They all kept it alive. So it's, yeah.
And, yeah, absolutely. And there's this like thread that I wanted to touch on indigenous futurism, like, so that we're looking past just what's happening immediately. You incorporate this into your songwriting. Can you give us some examples, or like what that vision is in your songwriting?
What's that? The indigenous?
Yeah, looking down the road, like seeing, the nations going further down, 50, 100 years down, and how you see those things evolving in your songwriting.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I think maybe songs are dreams, right? Like they're living embodiments of dreams. And I would like to think that doing my small part and contributing to that dream is going to be just like a little stepping stone. Maybe there's somebody behind me, younger than I am, older than I am, doesn't matter, just in this lifetime, that finds a source of inspiration or a source of hope or pride in their culture. I think that is what we're doing when we make these artifacts, right? Me as a storyteller, as an artist or singer-songwriter, every song and every story is an artifact. So I would like to think that I'm leaving my little piece here for the next person. And, one day, if there's enough of us doing this and, living a good life and leaving these positive things behind, then I think the future is bright, and it can be very, very bright, and it's like, you think about the history in this country, about what's happened to our people, just to even be here today is like against so many odds, so I'd like to think that. I think, like I'm already a part of the fourth generation of like after, like colonial destruction, and it's just, yeah, so I can, I have nothing but high hopes for the next, four more generations, 5, 6, 7. So
yeah. And I mean, the song that I wanted to talk about was Red Dress. You have this out as a single. It just came out this year, right? In May, on the 5th of May. I mean, it's such a powerful song. Where I was just talking to you a little bit before we hopped on here, and how it begins, and like, it's such a powerful song. What inspired you to write that story that is artifact now? Like, it's like a moment in time that you kind of locked in there, so that generations, and even our generation, is acknowledging or aware of the kinds of things that happened in our past. I mean, truth and reconciliation can only happen once the truth comes out. You can't reconcile until the truth is there. And I think that you're getting at some truths here. Can you tell us a little bit about the nucleus behind Red Dress?
Oh, yeah, that's a song I started quite a few years ago, actually. I spent a couple of years during the pandemic working as a social worker, Indigenous First Nations Youth Center here in Toronto. And, I was maybe for the first time in my adult life, I had been so involved with community. Throughout my 20s, I was just traveling and playing music and chasing a dream, for all of my 20s, basically. It wasn't until the pandemic I had to sit down and stay still. But I happened to find myself back in my community and working with a lot of these young people who I seen myself in. I was definitely homeless at times, sleeping on couches, couldn't rub two freaking nickels together. So here I am with the responsibility of looking after young people in that way. And yeah, I guess that was just such a raw nerve, I think, after I lost a couple of those young people working there, and in various ways, there's so much loss in our community. Death is no stranger to Indigenous people. But I started writing those notes and those verses, those first two verses, especially. Those are two people that are very close to me. And it just kind of lived as a note for a long time. And it wasn't until I got back to work on this record that came out in October that I felt like it deserved to be a song. And I really thought about it came out last year, so it had been a few years of just like more loss, more death, and like, it felt like as a society we're growing and people are acknowledging this history, but at the same time we're still losing people, and a lot of like young Indigenous women. So I was just, if the song had to happen, at least I had to do my part. And that song was one way of doing that. And I'm really proud of it. It was a really vulnerable song for me to put out. And, it didn't come out on the record initially for a number of reasons. But one of them being, it's just that, these are real people I'm talking about. This is a real community. I didn't make any of this stuff up. So you always have to be sensitive when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. And how was it received? Like, I mean, it's been out since May 5th. Like, what's your sense of how people are taking it?
I have no idea. Every time I see people out around, like people seem to like be really excited by it. A lot of the musicians in my life keep telling me it's their favorite song I've ever written. So that's always flattering to hear. But you never know how it affects people. I still think of myself as sort of an obscure, like Indigenous singer, songwriter, folk singer. So like, the commercial success of it, I have no idea, to be honest with you. I don't keep an eye on numbers or anything like that. I just put it out. And, when those stories come back to me and people, find some value in it, then, it's always, it's humbling and it's rewarding in various ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And the language of fishermen, which you alluded to from October of last year that came out, I mean, again, 9 songs, just amazing. I really was drawn to Cosmic Carousel. It's such a great, it feels to me that it's very uplifting, similar to what you're saying of finding the positive amongst, you could get weighed down with all the not so nice things. And I find that your music kind of is able to look at it, address it, and elevate and kind of see it from what it is through the processes that people go through to kind of, deal with all of these world havocs that sometimes, fall upon us. When you were writing the songs for the language of fishermen, what were your hopes inside, or what was your intent, I guess? What was your message or what you wanted to get across with this record?
I think that I guess I was just trying to do my part and do what the late author Richard Wagamese was doing in his writing, which is to humanize the First Nations experience in Canada. He shone a lot of light on a lot of really, I would say, dark corners of this country's history, but he did it with so much humor and reverence and just absolute love for the relationships, and the relationships of just people, not just Native people, but, just people from all walks of life. But he does it through, all that he knows. And that's living as a First Nations person in this country. And I take that whenever I read a book, it's always one of his books. It's always a reminder that doesn't matter what kind of song I'm trying to sing or write, a story I'm trying to tell, it's always going to come through this filter and hopefully humanize that experience for people and give a little bit more understanding. But the intention, honestly, halfway through writing that record, I was just like, well, here's 6 songs about more Native stuff, and I was just like, I might as well just write 3 more. And then, it's like, maybe I just never feel comfortable or hadn't at that point felt comfortable just like writing, like, cause I got millions, I don't say millions, but I got lots of love songs and lots of songs about heartbreak. But when I put my name on something like the last record, I guess it just kind of shifts and goes back into just wanting to be a voice for people where I come from,
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, well done. I feel it, in the record and in the words that you put to it. I guess to kind of wrap things up, Evan, again, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed your bringing us through your arc of being a musician. What does 2026 hold for you? What's like, you put this single out not in May. Is there new music on the forefront? Are you doing some shows this summer that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I'm starting a tour next week, just out Southern Ontario, and we go out for a date in Montreal with a really good friend of mine, Ian James Bain. He's an incredible country singer based in Hamilton. We're going to be like sharing a band and going back and forth song for song on that tour. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be really fun. And then I got other dates throughout the summer. I'm also like a touring bass player for a lot of other artists, lots of country singers. So yeah, I stay busy. I really do try to stay busy. But as far as new music goes, I'm sitting on a batch of songs right now. And I'm just wondering what to do with them. I recorded a few, but yeah, I'm always sort of just trying to think about what the best way to approach things are. And it may be a little too early to tell, but yeah, there's definitely lots of new music in the bag for sure.
Amazing. Well, then thanks so much. I really appreciate your words, and it's been a real pleasure talking with you, and all the best with the tours and the gigs, and please continue your storytelling as well. It really opens doors for people that aren't a part of that community, just in realizing and understanding. So carry on your grandfather's legacy as you're doing. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Job working for the city and a hustle on the side. When her son was born, she took a vow to straighten this life out. But the life of a brown woman was a lie she had to live without. Well, Soleil had a fight in her, the same fight in her bloodline. Didn't take shit from the cops, transition house guidelines. She knew how to call a bluff, had conviction in her doubts. But no one heard a brown woman got a life she had to live without. She won't be forgotten, won't lay this to rest. Just another brown woman, just another red dress, another red dress. Well, Kenzie was a student from a flying community on the streets of Thunder Bay, the cost of opportunity. But they found her in the same way those other brown kids are found when the creator called out their names. Another brown kid in the ground. They won't be forgotten, won't lay this to rest. Another brown woman, another red dress. They won't be forgotten, won't lay this to rest. Just another brown woman, just another red dress, another red dress. Well, they found Rebecca in the refuse of another troubled white man, discarded like some junk mail with his weekend's beer cans. But she had no dying words in the papers or the press. Just another brown woman, just another red dress.